Thank you. I want to thank all of you for joining us on this beautiful spring morning, the birds chirping and the flowers blooming. And I also want to thank Neil. He's taken a special sacrifice to be here today to give the student perspective, since this is board season and the last course before the board ended yesterday morning. So this is prime time, but he is, as Jason stated, heavily involved in education technology, primarily through the iTech group, which is a group of representative students from each class that my lab and I meet with on a monthly basis, along with some of the other administrative people from school, to get their input and feedback on various technology-related projects that we're working on, and mostly to get new ideas. What are the things that the students need that can make their life better, make their education better, and improve the educational process here at Pitt. Jason asked me to kind of focus on what we're doing here, what my lab provides, what technology students are using outside of what we provide, and then Neil to give you the truth about what students actually do use and some of what they find valuable. So I'll rely on him as a reference as to how the students perceive some of the things that we're doing, and I'll give you kind of my lab's approach to some of these technologies. So one disclosure, we spun off some of our technology a few years ago into a company called Connective that provides virtual patient software to various commercial entities. Neil doesn't have any disclosures. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the Lab for Education Technology before we jump into some of the content of today's session. So we've been here for 16 years, going on 17. It's a group of people down on the mezzanine level between floors 2 and 3 here in this building. We've had various projects and various software applications that we've developed through a lot of hard work from the people you see here. We've got education specialists and software developers there. And a lot of what you're going to see today is really a product of their hard work. So I wanted to start out with a phrase that's kind of well known in the architecture and design world: form follows function. This has been attributed or misattributed to different people. It's really Louis Sullivan who's the first recorded use of the phrase, and he really was talking about architecture and building buildings. And Louis Sullivan's kind of given credit for, in the late 19th century, starting the trend to build skyscrapers. And while this first skyscraper of his looks a little bit modest, the Wainwright building in Chicago, that was a tremendously higher building than any building before. And in describing how you should design architecture, he ascribed to the thought that you should look at what the building has to accomplish, what it has to, what the function of a building is, and then design around that, making sure that what you design looks like and acts like what it's supposed to do, which was a bit of a departure from the architecture prior to the late 1800s and early 20th century design. And that was spilled over into furniture design and various major changes in the way that design was approached, with more simplistic, more basic, more direct design. And that's what we try and do in the lab. And I don't think my phrase will become as popular as form follows function, but we kind of follow the idea that technology follows pedagogy. And it's the needs of the student, the needs of your needs, and the pedagogical underpinnings of an educational program that dictate how we design the technology, which technologies we use, how we combine those, and make it into a program and not just a technology. We rarely, if ever, start with the technology first and then go out looking for a use, mostly have a need and then develop something around it. So to try to stay with one of the pedagogical, very familiar constructs and There's many different ones that we try to support. But I picked one to kind of organize some of the technologies that we're going to go over today. And this one, Bloom's taxonomy and its revised version, are pretty familiar to most people in this room, I'm sure. And these are some of the technologies that my lab either developed or support and kind of lined up along the increasing levels of cognitive processing and the increasing levels of educational sophistication as a learner moves from the bottom levels of remembering and understanding on his or her way to expertise at the top, with being able to create and evaluate as demonstrations of the level of skill and learning that the student has accomplished. So I'm not going to cover everything we do in the lab. I really just, and everything that medical students and residents, and to be aware too that our applications are used by the dental school and also the pharmacy school, nursing school at one time used some of these. So I'm not going to cover everything. I just picked out a few that I thought might be of interest to you and might be applicable to some of your programs. So we mentioned Navigator already, and Navigator has become kind of the Swiss Army knife of software applications for the medical students. And it's kind of the central hub and home of a lot of different applications. The most prominent are the traditional and longest lasting use of technology in medical education, which is purely the providing digital content to the students in an accessible, easy way over the web, which seems pretty basic now, but when I wrote the first version of the code 16 years ago, that was a fairly novel concept, and there was no commercial software that did anything like that. But it's grown quite a bit since then. So, in addition to being able to provide documents and slides and videos, the calendar is an important differentiation from other software out there. The students really have a chronological approach to their learning and a very structured day-by-day events and requirements. And to that, we've added quizzes and surveys. There's a course director's blog. Moving a little higher up, there's mechanisms to facilitate group learning, portfolios, scholarly projects, some of these things you may be familiar with. For those who here has interacted with Navigator in any way? And Neil, is this something that the medical students spend some time with?
Navigator is the base of what we do within the med school. We use the calendar pretty much exclusively. That's the only calendar that we use, that we reference daily, to find out where we need to be and what lectures are happening and what lectures aren't happening, and kind of schedule the whole week. We also use it for podcasting, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. It gives us links in several different formats. We can have just a list of podcasts, or we can go lecture by lecture, and the podcasts are linked with the class notes. So we use that almost, like I said, daily.
And so, like Neil said, they get a lot of their content off here. So you can kind of look at the top few lines. It's broken down by events, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, chronologically, with the digital materials that are associated with each event. And then there's a mobile version that they can access on their phone. Just about any type of digital content that can be distributed and displayed via the internet can be distributed and displayed via Navigator. I also tried to make this the kind of one-stop shopping for students, so they can log in one time and then go to various different applications, various different functions, well beyond what you see here in the screen, without having to log in again. One of those that I'll highlight that's become exceedingly popular and used in varying ways is what we call portfolios. And this is just an example of one. I've tried to hide the identity of the actual student, but this is a real portfolio, and actually was just used in the last couple of weeks for the integrated case studies course. And just to give you an idea what's going on here, the student is in a small group where we had discussion of virtual patient cases, which I'll highlight a little bit later. And the 3 different facilitators over the course of the, is it 6 weeks or 4 weeks, are listed there and accessible there. And here's a discussion where we're giving John Q student feedback as to how well he's participating in the class, what things he might need to work on. And this is just one example of thousands of personal interactions between faculty and students, and the ability to kind of have this asynchronous digital interaction that not only provides the mechanism, but also provides a record of how he's doing and and feedback from various different places. So these are all John Q students' portfolios, and this scrolls down even farther. So for many courses, many small group events, there is a portfolio set up for the facilitators and the students to communicate outside the classroom, outside the small group, and to also kind of create a record of the students' personal feedback.
Kind of going off of that, I just wanted to bring something else up. With the portfolios, we have a one-stop shop for the scholarly research project. Sometimes it's hard to know who to include on emails, what things need to be submitted. The portfolio for the scholarly research project really kind of puts it all in one place. We can post in the discussion, and everybody that needs to see it sees it. Anybody can reply. It also goes to some of the first-year classes. There's presentations we give in the small groups. This is if more than one person is on the group. We can look at each other's presentations before the class. We can give recommendations. We can post on the blog there. So it's really a one-stop shop. It really helps.
Question?
This information, who's able to see it?
So that's kind of part of the beauty of the software. So we can tailor who should see the various interactions. So for some portfolios, it's the entire small group, maybe 12 students and the facilitators who all see the same discussion. In this particular one, it's just this student sees his personal feedback, and no one else can see it. On others, the students, various counselors and advisors can see some of the feedback so that they can look at what kind of feedback the students are getting through the course of the 4 years. So, and that's kind of the secret sauce of portfolios, is that you're able to very carefully define who can see things and who can't, and design that. So if you have a particular need for secure communication and two-way feedback with a student, we can tailor a portfolio that works for that particular course and that particular need. So kind of looking at Bloom's taxonomy again, a lot of what happens on Navigators down here in the understanding and remembering, the didactics and the foundational content that every student needs to have access to and interact with. And then kind of moves up in levels of cognitive processing, the group learning portfolios that I just showed you, where people interact around a topic, discuss a paper or discuss a research project, gets at some of the group benefits of group learning, some of the benefits of personalized feedback. So the educational theory and research supports that that's a higher level of learning, and higher cognitive processing is necessary to write a comment, to respond to a comment, to discuss a paper, to discuss a presentation. And then moving up to scholarly project, where students are actually creating materials, and over the course of the 4 years, doing a research project, getting personalized feedback from their mentors, and working at a much higher level of Bloom's taxonomy than just the distribution of content on Navigator. Now, Neil did mention the podcasts, as we call them. They're really recordings, video lecture recordings that actually started out, I think, around 2000. It's about 10 years ago. It started out with a student who had a skiing accident and was not able to attend class for a prolonged period of time in the second year. And they came to my lab and said, is there a way to record the lectures? I mean, now that's a pretty standard activity, but at the time there was just a handful of software applications out there. We found one, installed it, was pretty unstable at the beginning, but it was just for that one student. Very quickly, the other students got wind of this, found out there's a URL you can go to and get recorded versions of the lectures. And initially, we encouraged this as supplementary activity, something you can do if you happen to miss a class, car breaks down, get a flat tire, whatever, or if you want reinforcement and review. That didn't last very long, and sometimes good intentions have unintended consequences. But this is an actual photo from one of my lectures that I will confess that it was a rather sparse attendance, but I do have to say the one person was there. It looks like she's really excited to be there. Now, to be honest, it was a snowy day. About 5 minutes later, about 10 or 12 students showed up, and we had a handful. But anybody here lecture to the med students? Is this an uncommon? This has become a kind of a big issue here, and I don't have the solution today. But students, are smart and they're efficient learners, and they found out that this button down here, it says 1.6 speed, is a really valuable way to save time and have time to do additional studying. And if you look at some of the cognitive science, the brain can actually listen faster than most people speak. And again, the students can learn more quickly watching this. And, if you can do it in your slippers with your feet up, that's kind of nice too, and not have to drive through a snowy day like yesterday. So we can't blame them for using it, although there may be some ways that we can kind of take that concept of learning at home and at least doing the didactics and the kind of foundational knowledge acquisition at the bottom of the pyramid through online learning. Panopto is a technology that comes out of Carnegie Mellon. It's now commercialized and used by the university extensively, and it's similar to what we're doing with the lecture recordings, in that it's software that allows you to record a lecture and broadcast it back over the internet. The difference with Panopto, it's not designed for just classroom use, but it's also designed for personal use. And Pitt has a big license to it. It even has a dedicated cloud-based website where you can house your recorded lectures. So it doesn't have to be a medical student activity. You can sit down at your own desk at home and record a lecture, post it up here. If you go to the My Pitt video website, there's a little button. It's kind of hard to find up near the top. It says download Panopto. Let me take you through the steps. So you download the free software from Pitt onto your own desktop. It works on both Windows and Apple devices. You can record your own lectures if you got a camera on your laptop, or you can hook up a camera to your computer. You can get the video. It plays up in the upper left-hand corner, captures your slides as you're going through them, captures your audio. At the end, it wraps it all up in a nice bundle, and you hit one button, and you can send it up to the My Pitt video hosted site, and you have a place to put it and a URL that you can put on your own website, email out to students. To view it, you have to have a Pitt ID and account, so it is secure in that way. Notice, though, that we got videos from the law school, from undergraduate school, a number of different schools from the university have content on here. You can decide whether you want it to be publicly available or not, and it's actually, I think it's kind of nice. There's a lot of interesting topics that you might not normally engage with here that are all available to anybody that works here.
Can you edit it easily? So if you record and you see the
Right. I talked to somebody just yesterday who's done a lot of work with Panopto, and they said that's one of the things that's not easy to do. So what it's really optimized for is being quick and easy and simple, and one button, and you can edit you can trim the beginning and the end, but you can't change anything in between. So in trade-off for ease of use, it's also got some limited editing capability. Yes.
Is anyone using this for medical health staff or not so much?
Maybe, I don't know. Right. What's that? I'm
They
sorry.
don't have a PIN login, they can't see the videos.
Right. You have to have a bit login. The residents and all the faculty have one. Not everybody knows their PIT account credentials, but it's out there. Residents don't know. Sorry. Now, some of these applications, they have opened up to UPMC, so I could be wrong. This is where I'm kind of new to Panopto. So we'll probably be converting over to this because it's free, or provided by the university, not entirely free, but compared to the software we're using now. This is the other thing that keeps students out of the classroom, especially this time of year.
Can I talk a little bit about the podcasting?
Sure.
So, as the representative for the class, the technology representative for the class, podcasting has really been kind of the biggest difficulty communication between the course directors and lecturers and the class. It's kind of interesting how it's almost impossible to give a lecture to one person, right? And that's a problem that we need to find a solution for. But it's not like people aren't listening to these lectures. If you go back, you can actually do analytics on the recordings. If you go back even a day after the lecture has been recorded, 120 of people have watched the lecture. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how this technology progresses, because you can't give a lecture to just a computer or just one person, but there needs to be that communication between the students and the lecturers, but also the technology needs to be used. If I don't have to commute an hour here and an hour home for an hour of lecture, I'm not going to do that. Or if I can listen to it at 1.6 speed, I'm going to do that. If I have 6 hours of lecture to watch, or there are 6 hours of lecture that day, it's a lot easier for me to sit there with my coffee. If I need to go to the bathroom, just pause it, go to the bathroom, and come back and not miss anything. But again, there's the difficulty of getting the quality material presented correctly. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes.
Question.
I'm curious about from the student perspective, the motivation to watch the podcast topic from your PIP professor versus a professor at a different institution on the same content. Maybe there's a teaching difference, or their method is better for your learning style.
So we're going to talk about third parties, and that's a very good point. Yes, there's some lecturers aren't the best lecturers, some lecturers are amazing lecturers, right? From my class, from my feedback that I've gotten from my classmates, is that we all used Pitt's podcasts for the most part. There are really a few outliers, but everybody listens to the Pitt podcast, and then if something they don't understand, then they go to the third-party resource. It's a little bit different for board studying, but we'll get into that.
One other feature of Panopto I forgot to mention is that you can embed questions within your presentation. So if you want somebody to stop and answer a question, and from a pedagogical standpoint, from a learning design standpoint, that's much better than just having a passive learning experience where you're just watching and listening. And if you do it in conjunction with Navigator and play these back through Navigator, you can get the data on the performance and even add that into other data that's going on that's being collected in your course. All right, so we did mention the other big distraction for medical students, which is board review. I'm not going to get into why, but this has become a real focus of second-year student activity for good and logical reasons. So the company that makes first aid for the boards, the print version, also has an online version they call Scholar RX. So a couple years ago, teamed up with the head of Scholar RX and came up with a way to, instead of fight them, join them and combine Navigator and board review and make it easy to blend the two. So what we have now is, this is a screenshot from Navigator for the Digestion and Nutrition course. You can see that some guy's talking about imaging and celiac disease. And just at the bottom of this are step 1 questions, or board review questions. If this and where I got those and where course directors can get these now is to go to the ScholarRx website. There's a search function up at the top. I can put in celiac disease, and I can filter for board review questions, and I get an entire list of well-written, vetted, and board review questions that are supplemented with additional materials and explanations for each of the answers. So this is one on Candida esophagitis. It's got a question, it's got a nice image, it's got the multiple choice, and if you scroll down farther, you have an explanation for A, B, C, D, and E, why B is correct and why the others are incorrect. It's a lot of work. Any of you who have written quiz questions or test questions, to write really good questions that really get at specific learning objectives is a lot of work. This saves a lot of time and effort, and we can embed those directly in Navigator. If you're doing this, you just give my team a list of the questions you want, where you want them, and we suck up all the data from ScholarRx, embed it into a multiple choice question navigator with some extra added benefits. You also get some feedback as to how the entire class is performing. So here 62 students have responded to this question, and you can see the breakdown of where the answers lie. Again, and this is more data that you can use to pull into some analytics for your own course and topics in your course.
So can faculty members access this? So for example, when they teach medical micro, input questions and that students
So
practice on those?
the way the license works right now, at least this just started this year, so we may make some changes to the license, but the license is for the 150 medical students, and it's actually for only 8 months of the year. So it's a little expensive, but if it's for the medical students, no problem. For students outside of that, might have to figure out a way to pay for a few more licenses.
The faculty can access this too?
Yes.
What is the process to add those questions to your lecture?
So if you find a question that you like,
How do you do that?
there's a tiny little number up there. It's a QID. And you email that number to my staff, and we then have some back-end software that sucks it into your course. And you just say what day you want it to appear on, and what events in your course on Navigator that it's associated with.
I'm still a little bit confused. So how do you get to that QID number? We would have access to a list of
Yeah,
questions?
no, you go to the same place the students go to, except as a faculty and as a member, you can search the questions and you can see all the answers. Yeah. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that.
The student perspective on the scholar.
I was going to butt in if he didn't let me talk about this. This seems like a fantastic idea. This was only used for 1 or 2 courses this year, but I know that especially second year students are very focused on, is this board relevant, and are you sure it's board relevant, and is it really board relevant? This is a great way to make question writing easier for course directors, and it is clearly board relevant. It is written by First Aid, which is the primary resource for board study. It's embedded into Navigator, so they have easy access to it, and it kind of ties the concepts that are being taught in class back to that step board review, so everybody, everybody's happy. So this is a great idea.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That actually was my initial motivation. We've gotten so wrapped up in the logistics and the process that and gotten distracted from our original concept was that a lot of what we do teach is board relevant, but the connection is not always made. If we can embed the questions right there, right next to the content, then going to class and participating in the educational activities may seem a bit more relevant. Another way to maybe bring students into the class, the pulmonary course this year did this, where they combine the audience response systems, and one the school uses is Turning Point, but there's another one called Poll Everywhere, which we're also starting to use now. The Turning Point, you have to have the little clickers, which all the med students have. With Poll Everywhere, it could be done using any mobile device, even an old-fashioned SMS text message can access it, or a laptop. But these are both accomplish the same thing. It's the audience can respond to questions that you post. And combining this with board review, the pulmonary course had regular sessions scheduled into the regular second-year medical students course that they would just do board review for an hour. And they post the same questions that we just saw from Scholar RX. Students would respond and then could discuss live the responses and discuss why things were right or wrong. It makes for a more engaging experience. So let me jump to another technology that we've used a lot. This is VP Sim. This is virtual patient simulation, which is kind of what you see here, in that there's a patient on screen who has signs and symptoms and has problems to be solved. And as a learner, you can look at physical exam, get additional history, order laboratory studies, and observe the response, the results of those and how the patient responds to various interventions. And this slide is also up here because you can't get a presentation from a gastroenterologist without having diarrhea somewhere in the presentation. So this is another one, again, in the GI realm, where at this point this patient has also colitis, needs screening for colon cancer, and there's various ways to approach that. And depending on which choice you make, the patient goes down different paths and has different outcomes. May get a colonoscopy, may get surgery, and depending on how well you manage the patient, her outcome, the cost, the time and morbidity and mortality change based on your individual decisions. Again, a more sophisticated way of learning, a little higher up on Bloom's taxonomy, where you're making decisions, analyzing multiple factors, and coming up with a plan. The nice thing, too, is it's safe and easily accessible, and especially popular is going back and trying again and see if you can have a better outcome. And this is what the authoring interface looks like. It's a little complicated, but you can kind of get the sense that these kind of tan-colored blocks are all the right decisions and all the right choices for diagnostics and intervention. And then you can see that colectomy in red is an undesirable outcome, but for each one of these you can have specific feedback, feeding back to the student why that was a good or bad decision, and maybe the opportunity to back up and try again. If you don't think they're effective, this is a real picture of a real student. St. George's in London uses our software, and they happened to catch her right at a fairly dramatic point in this particular case. So if the cases are well written and well crafted and realistic and authentic, the learner can get quite engaged in the process of solving the case. And I've been on rounds with third and fourth year students, and they talk about cases that they've seen in the past. And I realized, well, that's a virtual patient case that you saw, and they kind of forget that that wasn't a real person. And, but if you believe that illness scripts and practicing and having more illness scripts in your head is a valuable educational method, this is one way to gain some more practice. So Neil, you just finished up a course that relies on VPC.
Integrated case studies we just finished, and I think we used VPC a couple times the past couple of years, but integrated case studies really took advantage of this format. And the course director was Dr. Doshi. I hope he doesn't mind me dropping his name. But he did a very good job of setting it up to go through the flow of how you actually think as a physician, which we really haven't had a whole lot of exposure to. It's been learning these things in this order. It's not the whole thought process of developing a differential, what are the symptoms, what test do you order. And the way that you go through the case, it's very much you make the decisions. He described it as a choose your own adventure book. You make a decision, you run labs, you get the results, and then what happens? You do a treatment, something happens. If you do a different treatment, something else would happen. And it really encouraged a lot of group discussion. I think I learned more during those 4 weeks, just pulling everything together, than a lot of the other courses that we took. So this if used correctly, this would be a fantastic way to do it.
The question with this, many of these cases, when you read them, it's so well worded and so specific never talk that way. And they have
Unfortunately.
accents, and they cut off words. And how do you incorporate that in some way? When you write these, do you actually take it from recordings of hearing real patients talk?
So when we train people to write virtual patient cases, that's one of the main things the early things we tell them is that try to base these off a real case. Try to use, or you should use the voice of the patient, not you presenting a clinical case, but rather the patient speaking. Some of them we get actors, the standardized patients especially, they play, and we record either just audio or oftentimes video of the patient talking. So you can capture some emotion and inflection, and if it's relevant to the case. Sometimes just having text on the screen is all you need because you're trying to teach specific clinical decision making and communication and because I just show this little diagram here that kind of lays out where virtual patients are good at teaching clinical decision making, but perhaps things like communication and history taking and counseling are better done with a standardized patient, a real person that's trained to do that. When you're thinking about where to use which technology, this is kind of a good slide. There's a lot of overlap, but this guy gives you a general guide. And just a quick shot of example of multiple different types of simulation being used. This is a mobile van that goes around the state of Ohio for the VA, and there's mannequins, there's virtual patient, there's a task trainer for a pelvic exam, there's even a Skype connection with a standardized patient, all around one single case using different modalities to teach different aspects of GYN care to VA physicians who tend to not have a lot of GYN care experience.
To get back to your question, you could write the VP sim such that you have a list of several questions that you would ask. You ask that question, and then it would take you somewhere where you would get an appropriate response from that patient. So if you ask an insensitive question, you would get an emotional response. Whereas if you ask the appropriate question, you wouldn't get that. You'd go take a different path. So it all depends on how you write the VP sim.
So let me just skip a couple slides and jump to Peter Drain. He and I have been working the last few years on trying to solve his challenges. He wanted to develop an educational program that fostered critical thinking, required deeper learning, and achieved higher order cognitive skills, higher up on the Bloom's taxonomy. And he also at the same time was part of this new biomedical master's program for students who have graduated from college but are not in medical school yet and have a year to spend getting a master's degree and preparing for medical school. So we had kind of a clean slate and opportunity to do something a little bit different. So starting with the concept of a flipped classroom, there's a component of his course that is done online. In fact, it's really every week you have a cycle of 3 days of work. It starts out online with didactics and questions related to the didactics. There's a live component where students interact with Peter, and then there's a virtual small group. And during these sessions, use different types of technology to support them. Online learning modules and quizzes in the beginning. The live interaction has some didactics along with audience response system. In the virtual small group, the students are asked to write board-style questions and then exchange them with each other and give feedback between their peers and pick out the questions that are most relevant. He does this in a very structured fashion where each week there are 5 specific learning objectives, and each learning objective is tied to a didactic that's done online, and each learning objective is tied to a specific didactic that then has, here's a little, it's usually PDFs that he was using, has specific questions related to that learning objective. And then when he's with them in class, they're using the audience response system to answer questions about those 5 specific learning objectives again. And he uses word clouds in there, especially where you have open-ended questions. So we go from a multiple choice question to an open-ended question that requires a little bit better comprehension of the material, a little bit more thinking, trying to move them up that cognitive skills ladder. And then on Friday, they meet online and can share a screen, can talk to each other, and create their own questions. Again, getting up to a higher level of cognitive processing. And he kind of drops in on each of the virtual small groups, gives some feedback, kind of acts as a facilitator. And then at the end of each week, he has a profile of where the students started, where they were in the middle in the live session, and then how well they created a question at the end, and each with kind of higher levels of cognitive requirements in order to accomplish each of the tasks. Then he starts over again the next week. So now that the course is done, he's got tons of data about how either an individual student or aggregate data from the class, how they performed at each step of the way, and also how well he performed as a teacher. So we haven't analyzed all the data yet, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of feedback that gives him. So I don't want, let's see how we're doing on time. What I'm going to do is just tell you what I think some of the future areas that we're going to investigate using technology. And some of you, again, may be familiar with mastery learning, competency-based, time variable learning. These are kind of popular topics right now. Bill McGee at Northwestern really outlined how mastery learning should be done. And we don't have time to step through the whole process, but it's the idea that you practice something until you have it, and you go on to the next higher level of learning after that, and that you don't go to the next level until you've accomplished the task at the previous level. And this is the way that the surgeons have applied this mastery model, where they acquire domain knowledge, do an assessment. If you pass that, then you go on to clinical pathways and algorithms, and you have an assessment at each step. It may involve virtual patients, eventually a simulation center, eventually the OR. And what's unique about this educational design, it's been studied, and it's randomized controlled trials have been done in lap hernia repair, cataract repair, colon cancer resection, and in teaching flexible sigmoidoscopy to surgeons, and shown significant improvements in the quality, the outcome for the patients and the learning experience for the students. Not a lot of RCTs in medical education, so this one appears to be well supported empirically. Lots of places for technology to insert itself. As you've heard, the domain knowledge distribution, virtual patients, especially the assessment that has to occur at each level. Those are good places for technology to assist. Competency-based time variable education. The academic medicine just published a supplement this month on this that brought together papers written by individuals who participated in a conference a year ago on this subject. Competency-based, I think we're all familiar with that concept, the time variable aspect of it. They're kind of stealing from the mastery learning, where you're not linked or constrained by a calendar, but rather constrained by the demonstration of mastery at each level. So you can take as little or as much time as necessary, and it's distinguished by really well-defined outcomes and assessments that demonstrate mastery and the outcomes that you're looking for. And it has the benefit of having a more personalized path through the curriculum, a less time-dependent path, and maybe the opportunity to specialize and customize your learning. A few schools have tried this. This is a diagram from Oregon Health Sciences University. All this is in the supplement from Academic Medicine if you want to look at it more carefully. A little hard to read from where you are, but basically the students take this path where they don't go on to the next stage, the next topic, until they have completed the previous one and demonstrated mastery. And so that conceivably the finish line happens at different times for different students. Now, if you read the paper, they admit that they got the competency-based part of this down. The time variable part is a real challenge. Again, though, I think it's an opportunity for technology to kind of fill in some of those gaps, provide some remediation and learning opportunities that enable you to adjust the amount of time a student spends on a particular topic. So, as I said, lots of things that will technology be required for, but that's kind of the look I had when I read about doing this in a time variable education in a medical school. So, kind of gone through that quickly. We have a few minutes left to kind of summarize, to dip into the hidden technology curriculum, the things that students are doing that I don't know about. I took a little survey with the students in the iTech group, which Neil is part of. This was from a couple of years ago, and got some quotes from them that they prefer mobile devices over a computer, but they still use laptops. And given the choice, they use a laptop more often than a mobile device, but really they want both, and they want everything on both platforms. I particularly like this one. Everything I need to know is on YouTube. And I even asked Neil today what he's studying from. Of course, the usual, first aid for the boards and some quiz banks and YouTube. We only use half or less of your curriculum because we find better teaching online. This is one of the biggest changes. A few years ago, students here were pretty clear in the concept of if it's on the test, it's in the syllabus. And if it's not in the syllabus, it's not going to be on the test. And that's all we focus on. And they look at the lecture recordings because those parallel the syllabus, but that was the focus and the blinders were on most of the time. Completely different now. And in informal polling, probably a third of their time or a third of the content, they go elsewhere. They exchange ideas with each other and nationally on student forums about where you might get a better lecture on celiac disease than that guy McGee gave at Pitt. So that's a big change that we're kind of adapting to. And then the idea that board preparation is a primary goal, mainly because we went pass-fail, or I'm sorry, the politically correct term is pass, no pass, because nobody fails here. But that has changed the way that students are ranked for residency positions, because the only metric that a residency program has, it's a number that they can use to separate out students quickly and easily, is the board scores. So much more emphasis placed on that.
Real quick, just the student's perspective on that.
Yeah, and you're next here, so
Oh, okay.
you tell me what the real truth is.
I told you that everybody watches all the lectures as a primary. That wasn't the complete truth. Word gets out pretty quickly what lectures are good and what lectures are not good. If a lecture is not good or a syllabus is not good, that's when students start to go to other resources. And then they watch the lecture if it's a good lecture, and then they go to the third-party resources. YouTube, it's a fantastic resource. You got to be really careful about what material you're watching, because over half of the material might be incorrect. But there are complete USMLE board reviews written by very good lecturers that are on YouTube. One that I've just discovered that a fourth year actually just told me about recently is called Online Med Ed. The whole purpose is to transition to third year and the thought process of different diseases. It is a fantastic, well thought out, well researched resource. There are also first year medical students making YouTube videos that aren't such great resources. So instead of saying don't go to YouTube, I think the focus should probably be on how do you vet a source and how do you verify that that's a good source. Even if it's not a peer-reviewed article, it can still be a good study material, but how do you tell the difference? That's kind of a big issue that I know some people have.
And what about some of these other kind of commercial applications? I know you said Pathoma.
So there's some standard ones that everybody uses to study for boards. First aid we talked about. There's videos associated with first aid, which actually I found to be less reliable than a lot of the YouTube videos I watch, which is kind of interesting because it's supposed to be a reliable source. Pathoma is one that absolutely everybody across the country uses. And it's he's a pathologist that does recorded lectures, and I don't know if anybody's found. The only mistake I've found is he circled the wrong thing on one of his slides once. But everybody uses Pathoma, everybody uses first aid, and then from there there's some other third-party sources that groups of people use depending on how you learn. Anki decks, which is something that a lot of people use, which is almost as bad as YouTube.
Yeah, these are like flashcards that are
That's exactly what
made,
they are.
made by
It's the modern
students.
version of flashcards. You can make your own. You can have one-sided. You can have two-sided. You can have fill in the blank, and you click a button and it flips it over or fills in the blank. You can make your own, and there are decks that people have made that they distribute. But again, you have to vet the source. You have to, is it a reliable source or not, because anybody can make them. But I know a lot of people that use for the rote memorization of medications or genes or whatever you want, stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of intuitive sense. Anki decks is the way to go. It's the modern version of flashcards. And there's an app on your phone and there's an app on the computer, and it tracks how many you get right, tracks how many that you think you get wrong. There's several buttons that says, I know this for sure, I need to review this again in 10 minutes, I need to review this again tomorrow, and it kind of tracks how you're doing. So it's kind of an interesting source.
And the students also relayed that they use a lot of the same mobile apps that the rest of us use, primarily clinical reference materials. This was from a survey done last year. These are the top 3 that students use. I'd say that's probably close to the top 3 that practicing clinicians use on their mobile device, especially making rounds and working in the clinical realm. So there's lots more that we do. I encourage you to reach out to me or to my lab. There's always somebody that will answer the labedu at pitt.edu email. We have an open door policy, so you can come down anytime. I have, if I'm not available, I have full-time people who are there to train you, assist you, help direct you into which technology you might want to use, or even better, work with us to develop something new and novel, like people like Peter Drain did. You have about 4 minutes left of Neil before he dives back into board review, so I encourage you to ask him any questions that you have. And thank you for your attention.